I was born among the tides in a city that floats because it refuses to drown. Venice makes a habit of defying the ordinary. Perhaps that is why it felt natural to follow a man who defied the possible. I had copied Gospels, annals, and shipping ledgers, but no page had a pulse until I met him. He drew machines that drank the wind, wings that yearned for sky, and skulls that opened like flowers. He wrote backwards with a cat's suspicion of strangers and a saint's patience for time. The city called him Maestro. I learned to call him Danger. He told me once, with a smile so thin it might have been a wound, "Marco, the world is a machine of veils. Pull one and you discover a pulley, pull that and you discover a hand, pull the hand and you discover yourself." And then he made me a promise and a warning in the same breath. "If you ever hear the words, Codex Obscura, leave the room or set it on fire." I did neither. Florence had been fasting on fear. Bonfires devoured mirrors and lutes, and for a season, men felt righteous because they were poor in color. On the Piazza della Signoria, the air tasted like a burnt psalm. I remember drifting through the crowd, the heat of hysteria pressing on my cheeks, when I saw him. Leonardo, eyes narrowed, counting shadows. He gave me tasks small enough to hide in my pocket, sharpening silver point, mixing verdigris, folding notes. His studio smelled of oil, chalk, and the soft thunder of ideas. The city felt temporary. His table felt inevitable. When I asked why he had not fled Florence's fever, he said, "Even illness has a pulse. We must learn the rhythm of the age before we prescribe a cure." One night a woman entered without sound. She wore black the way a secret wears midnight. Her face was not beautiful. Beauty is a negotiation. Her face was precise. She laid a sealed packet on the table and said only, "From Rome. For your eyes, Maestro." When she left, Leonardo watched the door the way a falcon watches distance. Then he set the seal to the flame. Inside, a single strip of parchment, unrolled with a whisper, 3 lines of cipher in mirror hand, and a small diagram of concentric rings broken by a tiny door. He did not let me read it, but he did let me hold the wax. It was black, and stamped not with a papal key or a Medici lily, but a curtain drawn across an eye. Later, I learned the sigil's name whispered in cloisters, the Order of the Veil. "Pack the brushes," he said, voice even. "We cannot survive on ash." By dawn, we were on the road to Milan. Milan greeted us with iron and appetite. Ludovico Sforza's banners tried to outstare the French, and every street vendor sold rumor by the yard. The maestro set up in a borrowed workshop near the canals, and for a brief winter I thought we were safe simply because machinery is so noisy it drowns out fear. He worked like a thief and a monk, stealing hours from sleep, worshipping at the altar of the possible. I fetched water, replaced nibs, and tried not to bleed on vellum. At twilight I copied his notes, diagrams of gears, sketches of a heart magnified into a cathedral, and phrases that made the spine lean forward, spiral of air like a staircase, lens as a frozen drop, blood as clock. Rumor said the French would crack Milan like an egg. The maestro said politics is a coarse hammer. Ideas are scalpels. I like scalpels. I did not like hammers. One afternoon, when rain turned the city into a watercolor, a priest arrived at the door. His cassock was clean. His smile was thinner than a blade. Father Tommaso Albergati, he introduced himself as if the name were a pardon. I admire the maestro's devotion to God's creation. I hope to learn where devotion ends. He trailed fingers across a drawing of a flying machine. "Man reaches upward out of gratitude," he murmured, "or out of arrogance." The maestro did not bow. "Out of curiosity," he said. "Man reaches upward out of curiosity." Father Tommaso's eyes warmed, but the warmth was like a candle held under glass. "Curiosity is a mouth, maestro. It feeds until it is bitten back." He thanked us, blessed us, and left the room colder than he found it. That night, Leonardo finally showed me a page. Not the codex, but a cousin, an orphan. A palimpsest of calculations, sketches of lenses, nested like shells, a note in the margin. If the eye is a room, the image is a tenant, and the soul is the landlord who never sleeps. He told me the page was bait, a piece cut from a larger beast that men in Rome had convinced themselves must exist. Codex Obscura, he said softly, is a rumor Rome needs to be true. "Is it true?" I asked. He smiled. Truth has 1,000 faces. Tonight it wears a hood. 2 days later, the French entered Milan. Hammers. We fled east with the city's dust in our lungs. And the woman in black, Isabella da Cremona, was waiting at the canal holding a travel pass already signed with names we didn't own. Rome wants you alive, she told the maestro. Alive is easier to contain. And you? Leonardo asked. Containment is not my profession, she said. I observe. I persuade. I prefer not to waste talent. The maestro looked at me as if to measure my spine. Marco, Venice is our net. And our knife. We went home. Venice does not have streets. It has choices. We hid in the Benedictine library at San Zaccaria, a place that smells like every ship that ever went looking for faith. Monks shelved wisdom by the pound. I learned to walk without echo. Leonardo asked questions without verbs. Light through glass, blood through valve, truth through fear. I catalogued, I mixed inks, I drank bitter coffee and slept in the margins. The maestro studied optics until candles flickered with embarrassment. He claimed that if he could teach glass to behave like water and water to behave like time, the world would look back and finally admit what it had always been. Is that the Codex? I asked. He laughed. The Codex is a rumor Rome needs to be true, he repeated. What I pursue is older. It is a hinge between the seen and the said. Isabella appeared sometimes at the edge of the page. She spoke to the abbot. She walked the cloister as if counting vaults. She asked the maestro gentle questions that sounded like nets. One evening she asked me, not gently, "Why do you trust him?" I answered, "Because he trusts what is measurable. And men who trust what is measurable," she said, "forget what is inevitable." She tilted her head as if listening to footsteps from far away. Father Tommaso is in Venice. I felt the room shrink. Why warn us? Because I prefer games that last, she said, and turned away before I could ask whether I was a piece or a board. That night, Leonardo placed a small bundle in my hands, wrapped in oilcloth tied with gut. If I am taken, he said, you run to Torcello. There is an Etruscan ruin near the old church. Beneath the third stone from the altar, you'll find a niche. Put this inside. Do not read it. Do you expect me to obey? I said too quickly. I expect you to choose, he said. Obedience is a habit. Choice is a man. We did not sleep. Dawn broke with a sound like parchment tearing. They arrived without hurry, as if certainty were a cloak against weather. Father Tommaso entered the library with 2 city officials and a letter bearing a red ribbon. He spoke with courtly reluctance. He always did. We have heard stories, he said, and stories are knives. I must ask the maestro a few dull questions to blunt them. Leonardo stepped forward. I confessed to the magnetic sin of inquiry. Tommaso smiled. The church does not fear inquiry. The church fears appetite. Then you are safe, Leonardo said. I am already full. The monastery's abbot trembled between love of Rome and love of genius. He gestured us to a small reading room where arguments cannot raise their voices. The door closed. The city's sigh fell away. Father Tommaso unrolled a parchment and set it on the table. The seal was the drawn curtain over an eye. The order of the veil had not come to ask. It had come to collect. Where is the manuscript? He asked without embroidery. The one the Pope fears he has already read. Leonardo glanced at the window, at me, at the loose grain in the table. I have written many things. Men choose the one that frightens them and call it mine. Tommaso tapped the table once. The guards did not move. When men stack light upon light, the shadow grows impatient, he said. We are that impatient. Isabella slipped into the room as if music had invited her. Father, she nodded, almost pleasant. Maestro, Marco, she turned to the inquisitor. If there is a manuscript, it is a scattered one. Fragments, equations blown like sand. We would need weeks to assemble even a rumor. Father Tommaso's eyes flicked to her with the smallest of frowns. You recommend patience. I recommend precision, she said. A public arrest would turn the rumor into a relic. Venice loves relics. He considered, then folded the letter and placed it back under the curtain seal. You have 3 nights, he said finally. After that, we concern ourselves with inevitability. He left us to our oxygen. Leonardo waited a long time before speaking. Games that last, he murmured, glancing at Isabella. She did not answer, but her silence stepped closer. When the door shut again, the maestro pressed his palm to my shoulder. Torcello, he whispered. Now, I ran. The lagoon swallows noise. By the time I reached Torcello, the world had become a map of breath. I found the old Etruscan shrine behind a church that forgot how to pray. The third stone from the altar wobbled like a tooth. Beneath it, the niche yawned, dry, narrow, eager. I pulled the oilcloth from my coat. My hands failed me. They opened the bundle. Not a codex bound in beautiful. Leonardo hates obvious obedience. Instead, 4 leaves stitched with wire, edges smoked, a script so careful it looks carved, and in the center of the first leaf a phrase that felt like warm iron. If God is the geometry of all things, then geometry is not a throne but a mirror, and what a mirror reflects does not kneel. The rest was a storm of diagrams, a lens like a womb, a heart like a pump that could be taught to lie. A circle of planetary orbits with a small door cut from the ring, a door labeled in mirror hand, exit for light. Behind me a voice said, "Close it." I turned. Isabella stood in the broken threshold, cloaked damp with lagoon weather, eyes steady. She did not reach for the manuscript. She reached for my gaze. "You don't serve the Inquisition," I said, suddenly sure. "I serve equilibrium," she said. Rome tilts, Florence burns, Milan eats itself. The veil keeps the table from flipping. Sometimes it strangles the cloth. "And you?" she smiled without teeth. "I prefer not to stain my hands with gravy." "Close it, Marco." "That phrase," I said, pointing to the first line, "because argument is a way to breathe. It is not blasphemy. It is a thought. Thoughts kill slower than swords," she said, "and more permanently. Father Tommaso will arrive by nightfall. He is skilled at permanence." I wrapped the leaves again, forcing the wire to bite my gloves. "If you fear the page," I said, "fear is your shepherd." "Fear is a habit," she said. "Choice is a man. Your maestro taught you well." We stared at each other while the lagoon rehearsed eternity. Then a bell rang somewhere, without interest. Isabella stepped aside. "I will give you a corridor," she said. "It runs from here to the back of San Zacharias' archive. Walk only when the bells are ringing. He prefers silence." Why help me? I asked for the second time in as many days. "Because men like Tommaso cannot imagine a world where an agent chooses anything but obedience," she said. "Because you will lead us to what we seek, whether you intend to or not." A pause so brief it might have been kindness. "And because I want to see if you are a piece or a board." I slid the bundle back into the niche. The stone closed like a mouth. "Good," she said. "Now we go back." We arrived at San Zaccaria on the 4th bell. The monastery sleeps as if guilt were a blanket. Isabella moved like someone who knows where sins are filed. We reached the little reading room where Father Tommaso had staged his patience. It was not empty. The inquisitor stood at the window, palms behind his back, looking out at a courtyard full of moonlight. 3 nights, he said, not turning. And on the 4th, a mouse returns to the pantry with clean paws. Odd. Isabella did not flinch. "If the pantry were empty, Father, the mouse would have crumbs." "Cleverness is not a virtue," he replied. "No," she said. "It's a tool." Leonardo stepped from the shadow by the stack. Older than the moon, younger than the room. "Father," he said, "I confess to an experiment." Tommaso allowed himself a small smile. "Do you? Imagine my delight." The maestro placed a single sheet on the table. Not the torcello leaves, a different anatomy. The drawing showed a heart made of brass, valves with tiny doors, a hand crank, and a note. If the body is a bellows, it can be resuscitated. Father Tommaso touched the margin as if testing the temperature of a river. "Resuscitated," he repeated. "You would replace the providence of God with the patience of gears." "I would replace nothing," Leonardo said softly. "I would observe a machine and help it remember itself." The inquisitor lifted his eyes. "And if a prince demanded that you teach him to live forever?" "I would tell him no," Leonardo said. "I do not serve princes. I serve wonder." Tommaso's smile vanished. "Wonder is an altar boys get lost on." I did not breathe. Isabella slid between them like a bookmark. "The maestro has nothing assembled that could be called a codex," she said, voice satin. "And if he did, it would be incomprehensible without him. Remove the man, and the pages starve." "That is a chillingly practical suggestion," Father Tommaso said. He turned to me. "What do you think, Marco Bellini?" "My name is no concern of Rome," I said, finding my courage where my fear had been nesting. "And yet Rome keeps such tidy records," he murmured. Then, almost kindly, "If there is nothing to fear. If there is something, it must be named. Naming is what keeps the sea from swallowing the shore." Leonardo folded the brass heart sheet and handed it to the inquisitor. "Name this gift," he said, "and then let me return to painting the Lord's Mother without interruption. Tommaso accepted the paper. 3 days hence, he said, I will return with a writ. If there is a manuscript, it will be produced. If there is not, you will sign a recantation of rumor. Venice floats on money. Money prefers calm water. He left without theater. The door closed. My knees threatened mutiny. Isabella exhaled. We bought you time, she said to the maestro, not safety. Leonardo nodded. Safety is an illusion that breeds laziness. She turned to me. The corridor is not infinite. Use it wisely. Why do you keep helping us? I asked again, hating how the question made me small. She surprised me then. She said very quietly, because when I was 15, a plague cart took my mother and a priest told me to be grateful. Ever since, I prefer instruments that answer when I turn them. She left the confession hanging and disappeared into the cloister with the elegance of smoke. Leonardo rested a hand on my shoulder. We will move the niche, he said. Torcello is now a bell. How? I asked. By making a louder bell, he said. We will give Tommaso something to find. The next day was a choreography of distraction. I carried a roll of innocuous drawings through the markets, pulleys, hoists, and a new kind of lock, and arranged to lose them near a canal where the city's informants fed. The rumor ran quicker than fish. By dusk, 2 men I did not know followed me with the competence of cats. Meanwhile, the maestro composed a decoy codex, a dozen sheets of exquisitely wrong ideas, machines that could not breathe, optics that would not see, anatomy with veins contradicted by geometry. He distressed the pages with soot and candle kiss, bound them with a strip of leather, and labeled the spine Tractatus de Excellentia Luminis. He said, the best lie bows to the truth before it runs. We placed the decoy in the monastery's east annex behind a case of dull sermons. Then Leonardo sent a note, plain, unsigned, to a contact whose hunger exceeded his caution. By midnight, the contact would tell the contact would tell the contact. By morning, Father Tommaso would have a whistle to follow. We returned to the little room with the small window, and for the first time since Florence, I saw the maestro hold his head as if it weighed more than genius. Marco, he said, if they break us, they will not break the world. Do you understand? No, I said. Good, he said. Understanding is a stone. Curiosity is a river. Keep moving. Before dawn, I took a skiff to Torcello and lifted the stone. The bundle looked patient. I added a 5th leaf, mine, with a simple copy in my clumsy hand, exit for light. Then I sealed it again. I wanted the world to find this someday and not know which hand had invited them. When I returned, the monastery bells were not rehearsing. They were screaming. The east annex had been opened like a throat. Shelves tilted, glass glittered, a monk bled prayers on the flagstones. The decoy codex lay on the table in Father Tommaso's gloves. He did not look triumphant. He looked patient. Very pretty, he said, as we were dragged into the room by city guards hired from poverty. But pretty is not persuasive. Where is the rest? Isabella stood behind him, eyes on me, unreadable. I searched her face for a corridor and found a wall. Leonardo raised his hands. Father, if your men planted this mess for theater, they overacted. Tommaso nodded to a guard. The man struck the maestro across the mouth with the practiced cruelty of debt. I moved without thinking and learned the shape of the floor with my ribs. Violence is an impatience I regret, Father Tommaso said, as if narrating a problem in logic. But rumor has a speed that requires cruel shoes. He turned to the abbot. By authority of the Holy Office and the Senate's good order, I seize this annex and all documents within. The maestro will join me at the Doge's guest rooms for a conversation that will end when it ends. Isabella stepped forward. Father, he did not look at her. You have been indulged. Do not become a subject of inquiry. She stilled like a blade. They took Leonardo. They left me with bruises and the taste of coins in my mouth. The abbot wept for order. The library smelled of fear and lemon oil. I crawled to the table and palmed a tiny shaving of leather from the decoy spine. A signal, a nothing, a hope. I tucked it under my tongue, stood and lied to whoever asked me whether I was all right. At dusk, a novice pressed a folded note into my palm, eyes wide enough for drowning. The note held 3 words in mirror hand, exit for light. It was not Leonardo's script. It was Isabella's. Night forgives certain crimes. I followed the note to the cloister's far wall, where damp can keep a secret. A door the size of a confession knelt in the stone. I pressed. It yielded. The corridor beyond was a spine of shadow, candle niches spaced like ribs. I lit none. My hands remembered the turning of skiff oars. My feet disliked remembering floors. At the end, another door. On the other side, not safety, not yet, but the sea wearing its best impression of forgiveness. I stepped out into air that had never read a decree. Venice exhaled. Somewhere behind me, a man who loved inevitability prepared his clever questions. In front of me lay Torcello, and Rome beyond that, and the kinds of choices that make men or make legends. I would like to say I chose courage. The truth is simpler and more dangerous. I chose the Codex. I left Venice with a forged ledger tucked under my arm and silence for company. On the lagoon, fog turns oars into rumors. By dawn I had become a merchant's assistant named Matteo Rossi, a man with too many receipts and not enough memory. In my satchel, a brass stylus, a splinter of leather shaved from the decoy codex, a traveling vial of lampblack, and the smallest courage I could afford. News moves faster than penitence. By the time I reached the Apennines, postings already declared. The painter-engineer Leonardo da Vinci is comfortably housed as a guest of the Holy Office in Rome. The word guest did an excellent job concealing iron. At the mile of black pines, a rider in a travel cloak blocked the road without appearing to try. She tipped her hood, and Rome's winter looked out at me through a pair of steady eyes. "Marco," Isabella said, "your talent for arriving where you shouldn't is maturing into a vocation." "You sent the note," I replied, the words too loud in my own mouth. "Exit for light. You wanted me to run." "I wanted you to choose," she corrected. "Running is a consequence. Choosing is a cause." She studied me. "Rome is not Venice. Here water does not forgive. I'm here to bring him home." "Home," she echoed. "Men choose words that make them braver." "Keep that one close. You'll need it." We traveled the last days with the decorum of contraband. The Tiber found us on a gray noon and carried us inside a city that wore stone like a crown and hunger like a perfume. Above us, the Vatican lifted its dome toward a sky that did not answer. "Where is he?" I asked. "In a room without windows," Isabella said. "But the walls have ears. Fortunately, so do I. People say Rome is layers. Castel Sant'Angelo proves it a mausoleum that learned fascinations older than saints." Isabella produced a paper that said everything and named nothing. Guards obeyed it, because disobedience requires a memory for consequences. She led me through corridors that once sheltered emperors, now shelter confessions. We waited in a side chamber, dressed in humility, a crucifix, a chair with the virtue beaten into it, a table that would sign anything for a quiet life. Then the door opened, and the room decided to breathe. He looked thinner, yes, but not smaller. The maestro had the courtesy to age like oak. Cut him, and the rings would only become more articulate. "Marco," he said, voice dusted with fatigue, "Rome has taken to likening hospitality with confinement." I bowed not because he wanted it, but because my hands needed to do something older than fear. 3 days, Isabella murmured. That is what I purchased with abstractions and patience. On the 3rd, the Order of the Veil convenes a private inquiry. You will answer questions. If you do not answer them, they will answer you. Leonardo raised a brow. "And you, Signora da Cremona? On which side will you stand?" "The one that remembers," she said simply. The maestro smiled, a real one, faint, surprised. Memory is a fickle witness. "But it does try." We spoke until sunset, wrapped the stones in a cold shawl. Leonardo asked about Venice, about the abbot at San Zaccaria, about whether the lagoon still whispered when it thought no one was listening. I told him everything, including the decoy codex and the shaved leather under my tongue that day. He nodded at each detail as if checking a series of pulleys for strength. When I described Torcello the 4 leaves, the 5th I had added, the phrase, "exit for light," he pressed knuckles to lips, thinking so hard the air leaned toward him. "Marco," he said at last, "do not mistake architecture for intention. The leaves, the niche, the phrase, all are parts, but parts can be assembled to conceal as easily as to reveal." "Does the Codex exist?" I asked. I had asked this before. I would ask it again. He smiled the way a mathematician smiles at a riddle told by a child who doesn't yet know it's older than the moon. "I exist," he said. "That has proven controversial enough. The Order of the Veil does not reside on maps. Its chamber is a rumor that found a room. We entered through an archive door that did not behave like a door, down steps that rehearsed humility on the soles of your feet, into a hall that had learned to listen more efficiently than God. They were already gathered, men in sober robes, faces convinced of their own moderation. At their center stood a lectern of obsidian, black enough to make a candle confess. Father Tommaso Albergati stood to one side, the curve of his mouth a compromise between patience and appetite. "Maestro," he said, "we prefer clarity to spectacle. Produce the manuscript Rome fears." Leonardo bowed the amount required to pass through a room without tearing it. "You fear an idea you cannot name. Give it a name, Father, and see whether it answers." Tommaso's eyes flicked to me. "And you, Marco Bellini, courier, acolyte, sometime liar, have you brought our ghost to heel?" I set my satchel on the table very carefully, as if a misstep might teach the floor a new language. From it I withdrew a narrow roll, bound with wire, my copy of the Torcello leaf, the phrase written in hurry and devotion, "Exit for light." I placed it on the obsidian. The black made my paper look indecently mortal. Tommaso unrolled it with 2 fingers. He read aloud, slowly, as if meaning were a scorpion that might feign sleep. "If God is the geometry of all things, then geometry is not a throne but a mirror, and what a mirror reflects does not kneel." A murmur licked the edges of the chamber. One man crossed himself the way you swat away a fly that might be a wasp. Another sucked a tooth, calculating the weight of the heresy against the market value of prudence. "Is this your hand?" Tommaso asked the maestro. Leonardo studied the script. "The hand is young and stubborn. The idea is old and flexible." He nodded toward me. "It is his copy." Tommaso's look said I had dragged mud onto the marble. "So the original lies elsewhere." "The original," Leonardo said, "lies wherever a man stands long enough to notice consistency." Tommaso did not sigh. Sighing is a luxury, but the room felt as if he had. He tapped the obsidian twice. The sound carried an argument in it. "Very well, we will test consistency." He gestured. The lamps along the walls guttered, then stabilized. A mechanism hidden in the plaster whispered to life. Shutters preceded lenses, lenses preceded light, light arrived as a disciplined geometry that favored no one. On the floor, a circle resolved, interrupted by a narrow breach, the same small door I had seen inked on a leaf under an Etruscan stone. "Exit for light. Step into your confidence, maestro," Tommaso said. "Tell us if it fits." Isabella's hand twitched by her side, a tremor no torch could read. Leonardo glanced once at me, not for permission, not for courage, just to make sure the future had a witness, and stepped into the circle. What followed should be told, simply because simple things are hardest to believe. The light folded. Sound lost its courage. A smell of rain on limestone, the air departing the room as if a door had opened in every direction at once, and then the circle was only a circle again, and the man whose mind had kept the world from drowning was not in it. The Order of the Veil did not gasp. Men do not gasp when theory behaves like a prince. They grow still, so still the future can walk between them without brushing cloth. "Translation," said Tommaso softly, not triumphantly. "As the maestro prefers to name miracles he does not owe to heaven." I moved before wisdom could argue, crossing the chamber, falling to my knees where his boots had been, pressing my palm to stone that still remembered weight. "Where? It wasn't a question, it was a wound." Tommaso answered with practiced compassion. "Where is not the right interrogative. What is a better beginning?" Isabella's eyes had become a pair of locked windows in a house you want to believe is empty. This was not agreed, she said, voice lower than reasoning. "No," Tommaso said, almost kind. It was inevitable. "They allowed me one night in a cell the size of a conscience." The walls wept mineral prayers. Sleep arrived, then denied me entry. I watched the candle invent time and tried to convince my hands to be quiet. Near midnight, the corridor breathed a different rhythm, and the door hissed at its hinges. Isabella slipped inside and closed the world on the other side. "You knew," I said. "I knew the room," she replied. "Rooms are honest. They do only what they were built to do. Men are architects of excuses." "What did this one do?" "Exactly what you saw. Light is obedient when geometry commands. The circle is a map with a door. The door is a proposition." And she shook her head once. "I cannot say where." "You won't," I said. She examined me as if testing glassware for hairline cracks. "I won't," she agreed, "because locations are less dangerous than purposes. You are asking the wrong questions. What is the right one? Who changes when a door opens? She reached into her cloak and pressed something into my palm, a small brass gear, edge etched in a mirror hand. Exit for light. He dropped it when the circle completed. Or the circle dropped it from him. Place your faith where you like. Why give this to me? Because Tommaso will keep the chamber. He believes in vaults. I believe in vectors. We are not the same animal. Which animal is safer? She smiled without teeth. None. In the morning, a guard with an honest face escorted me not to the street, but back to the chamber. The order arrayed themselves like arguments pretending to be men. The circle slept on the floor, eyes closed, dreaming angles. Marco Bellini, Tommaso began, you aided in concealing a manuscript that undermines submission. For this you could be broken until what remains of you is administratively easy. Instead, you will do something useful. He nodded toward the lectern. Atop it my copy lay where the knight had left it. You will write, he said. You will write a deposition that asserts, there is no Codex Obscura, only a set of notes and sketches whose misinterpretation bred hysteria. You will sign it. Rome will consider the matter measured. And Leonardo, I asked? Tommaso's gaze could have been mistaken for pity. A man who steps into an unproven mechanism to teach the church humility takes responsibility for his conclusions. Is that how you sleep? I said, the question escaping before I could dress it. I sleep beneath an idea larger than myself, he replied. It is called order. I looked to Isabella. She regarded me as one regards a chessboard that has decided to grow teeth. I will not write your comfort, I said. Then write your courage, Tommaso said. Describe what you saw. Rome is a library, even its lies are catalogued. He presented quill and parchment, a penknife to coax the nib, sand to stop the bleeding of ink. I sat. I wrote. I wrote everything except the thing that would have killed the part of me I was attempting to protect. I did not write that. When the light folded and the air altered, the maestro looked at me with a relief so fierce it scared the room. When I finished, Tommaso sanded the script and nodded once. Better, he said. Untruths told plainly harm less than truths told poorly. He dismissed the guards with a whisper. The chamber assumed we were friends. Marco, he said, voice without performance, Rome does not hate genius. Rome hates accidents. A world where ideas run without harness is a city with no walls. Walls don't keep tides, I answered. They keep ledgers, he said, and ledgers keep bread. He waved me away like smoke. Go, leave Rome. Your usefulness has expired until it doesn't. I didn't move. What will you do with the chamber? He smiled. Maintain it. Fear is an excellent custodian. And Isabella. He considered the name as if testing its worth. She is a weather vane that refuses to admit there is no wind in catacombs. I tolerate her because equilibrium occasionally needs a conscience. The door opened. I left because staying would have transformed me into something I had not agreed to become. Water unlearns distances. In 3 weeks I had returned to the lagoon, to the ruined Etruscan shrine that had first practiced the word exit. The third stone from the altar wobbled as if glad to see me. The niche yawned. Empty, not merely robbed used. The dust told a story of contact, not theft. The stone was warm enough to argue with winter. I lay on the floor and listened to the silence until it told me everything it refused to say. Then I placed the brass gear inside, as gently as one kisses the forehead of a child who might choose not to wake. Keep a door open for him, I said to the stone, because madness is simply prayer in a different grammar. When I stood, a figure watched from the ruined threshold, cloak cut to move the way truth pretends to. Isabella. You tracked me? I said. Don't flatter yourself, she answered. I tracked the gear. It prefers water. Did you tell him to step into the circle? No, she said. I told the room to be honest. He told himself to step. We stood in a truce composed of damp and breath. What will Rome do? I asked. What Rome always does, she said. Claim the future, publish the past, and invoice both. And you? She looked at the altar as if it were a negotiation. I will keep the balance from becoming a noose. Sometimes that means telling Tommaso there is no door. Sometimes that means making sure there is one. Which is this? She smiled with a tiredness that made her beautiful, both. Months thinned into a year, then sleeted into 2. I worked as a copyist again in Venice, except my clients did not know I was copying two worlds, the one with taxes and the one with geometry. At night I visited San Zaccaria. The abbot had learned the virtue of forgetting me. Sometimes I rode to Torcello to speak with an absence that no longer felt absent. On the feast of St. Jerome, a boy in a porter's cap delivered a sealed packet to my bench. Plain wax, no sigil, the courage of anonymity. Inside, a single page, mirror-written, brown ink thinned by a hand that had not surrendered to shaking. If the eye is a room and light its guest, the image is only an agreement to behave. If you wish to see me, rearrange your behavior. No instructions, no map, no apology for not being dead. I held the page to the lamp. The fibers glittered with fine grit. Sand not from the lagoon, sand pale as bone. Rome has quarry dust. Florence keeps marble dandruff in its cuffs. Venice carries salt. This was none of those. Torcello, I thought, but the niche was empty last month. Or I turned the page over. In the margin, so faint the paper almost refused to host it, was a tiny diagram. Concentric rings, a breach labeled exit, and below it a dot with two strokes crossing like a compass, rows missing 2 points. A mark I had not seen before, or perhaps had not learned to notice. If you have ever loved a city, you know it builds rooms for your grief before you deserve them. Years later, traveling under a name polite enough to be ignored, I reached Milan during a season when the sky practiced generosity. In Santa Maria delle Grazie, tourists of God and beauty took turns using all like a handkerchief. The Last Supper waited on the wall where patience has set a table. I had seen it before the years learned manners. Now I saw it as one sees a face the morning after a confession. I stood too close until a monk cleared his throat in the language of soft reprimands. Stepping back, I noticed what I had come to notice without knowing that I had, in the tablecloth's folds, a ghost of circles, a seam interrupted. The painter had left a fingerprint of a door in linen. I laughed, then choked on it. No one turned. Awe is a selfish instrument. At the far end of the refectory, a side door stood ajar where doors usually feared drafts. A small card asked the uninvited to remain so. I borrowed a habit of disobedience from an older life and slipped through. Beyond, a corridor, clean and forgetful, the white of institutions and compromises. Stairs, a storage room elder with dust. And then, of course, a chamber without windows, lit not by lamps but by the behavior of light itself. It was smaller than Rome's Cathedral of Geometry, humbler, built by a patient hand, rather than a budget. On the floor, a circle interrupted. On the wall, a shallow arch. In the center, nothing except the suggestion that nothing is always on the brink of confessing it has been everything all along. Marco. His voice arrived like a memory that had practiced. He stepped from the not-quite shadow where the circle almost touched the wall, hair whiter, eyes brighter, a smile with too much mercy in it to be safe. "You walked a long corridor," he said. "I walked because you taught me to," I answered. "Is this yes?" he said gently. "And also no. Doors do not lead to rooms. They lead to manners of seeing." I wanted to embrace him, and to strike him, and to demand an accounting ledger for the years we had been divided. Instead, I said, "Tommaso believes you are a lesson." "I am," he nodded. Just not his. "Where did you go?" He tilted his head. "Away is a compass word. I went through." I stared at the circle. "Can anyone who accepts that light is not illumination but invitation. Isabella, she has stayed her weather vane," he said. "Equilibrium preserved us from execution. Do not disdain it. She plays a game with a larger board than Tommaso imagines." "And Torcello?" He smiled at the name the way men smile at a childhood street. "Sometimes a niche is a doorway. Sometimes it is a lock. It agreed to be a door long enough. You wrote to me. I needed you to notice grit." He shrugged. "You did. What now?" I asked because I had never learned to stop asking that question, even when the answer might be a sentence. "Now," he said, "you return to Venice and write down what does not fit. You will be loud without noise. You will make the world curious enough to knock. Why me?" "Because obedience is a habit and choice is a man," he said, and his eyes approved of something in me I had not yet met. "Also because Tommaso reads you." "Let him." I stepped closer. "Will I see you again?" He touched my shoulder, a benediction that trusted my bones. "You already are." The room inhaled. The circle blinked. A draft like the sigh a city makes when it forgives a tax. He stepped back into the angle where the floor forgot to end, and the wall forgot to begin, and then he was simply the suggestion that he had ever stood there at all. Footsteps in the corridor, voices with official futures. I palmed the brass gear I had placed in Torcello's niche months ago impossible, and yet here, warm against my skin as if disagreement generates heat. I left by a door that had not been present when I entered and returned to the refectory where awe continued its commerce uninterrupted. Back in Venice, I wrote. I wrote as one copies a city while it floats. I did not write a confession. I wrote a rumor with better manners. Exit for light became a phrase scholars found in margins and sailors scratched on oars. Fishwives said it standing at the lip of storms. Priests, the good ones, used it for their private doubts. The Order of the Veil responded as empires do, with denials that taught listeners to be interested. Isabella sent no more notes, which was a note of its own. Sometimes in piazzas where newshawkers wound their lungs tight with hope, I felt a gaze the shape of equilibrium, and I knew she was somewhere, refusing to be a single side. As for Father Tommaso, reports reached me the way thunder reaches boats after the lightning has already had its portrait painted. He tended the Roman chamber the way a gardener tends an orchard that resents fruit. Did he ever step into the circle? Men like him prefer doors others have tested. The Torcello niche remained empty when I checked it, which, I admit, I did more often than pride should allow. Empty is a verdict only if you worship fullness. I learned to treat it like a question. In time, questions are kinder. Years drown and do not apologize. On an evening when fog carried the weight of stories down every alley of Venice, a boy in a porter's cap found me again. This time there was no wax, no mirror hand, only a ribbon the color of midnight, with a single stitched glyph, a curtain drawn over an eye, the Order of the Veil. Inside the ribbon, folded like a reprimand, lay a card with 5 words. The circle requires a witness. No signature, no address. But the fiber of the card caught the lamplight the way a certain refectory wall had. The grit in it remembered away places. The edge bore a nick a brass gear could have made. I looked up. The boy was gone? Across the canal, a door I had never noticed before, small, plain, there, because it had chosen to be stood ever so slightly open. Light breathed from the crack the way forgiveness breathes after an honest apology. I should tell you I went. I should tell you I did not. Both would be true in different grammars. Instead, I will tell you what happened in the water. A pattern moved under the surface, circles folding into circles, a seam interrupting the skin, a glimmer like geometry taking a breath. And somewhere in Rome, perhaps, a patient man who loves inevitability paused in his paperwork and stared at a candle, whose flame leaned against an invisible draught as if a door had opened. In a place papal maps prefer to call finished. The trial, as it turns out, was never his, nor mine, nor even the maestro's. The trial belongs to light, and to those who decide whether to kneel when the mirror refuses to.